So today, the question is, who is our neighbor? Is it just folks who work out at farms like this or live out in the country? Or maybe it's folks who live here in the city. Maybe it's folks who live in apartments. Maybe it's folks who are sick or aren't doing so well. Or maybe it's students who live on the campus. Who's our neighbor? We're going to think about that today on Now at Devotions from Trinity Lutheran in Cyrus. So, I was born here in a small town. I was born in Morris, and my parents moved here just a few years before I was born, and they got jobs here on the university campus here in Morris. It's University of Minnesota. And so I grew up as a professor's kid, and that was always an interesting position to be in because it put me between multiple worlds, right? I had friends whose dads and moms were farmers. I had friends who were lawyers and doctors. I had friends who were other professors' kids here on campus, and I went to the public school, and I was always in between worlds, but I would often be stuck between people's disagreements about who their neighbor is, right? And this happened all the time. And that's what we're talking about today. We are in the book of Luke, and we are thinking about the Good Samaritan this week, wondering who is our neighbor. So in Luke chapter 10, Jesus is talking with the fellow, and he says, what should I do? How do I love God? What's the right way to live this life? And Jesus answers him immediately. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, might, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the man, it seems like he's looking for an out. Now, maybe we could be generous and say he just wants to do things right. And I think actually a lot of times people of faith, that is very much the case. We just want to do things right. This fella says, well then, who's my neighbor? Right? Does that just mean like love the other Jews around here? Like, because I do that work as best I can, but we disagree about faith and we disagree about family and whatever. And Jesus completely blows this out of the water. I mean, he gives him no space at all. Just explodes the idea that your love or your consideration should be for those people with whom you share family ties or with cultural ties or religious ties, people that you agree with, basically, right? And even those ones are the people we don't even get along with, people we agree with. But Jesus says, no, hold on. And he offers this example of the Good Samaritan. He says, hey, there's this guy on the side of the road. And the hearer of this story would have assumed, oh, the fellow on the side of the road is a believer like I am, a good Jewish kid, who was traveling, or a merchant or somebody who was traveling and got hurt. And then nobody will stop and help him, not even a priest. Nobody will help him except the Samaritan comes by to help. Now, for the hearer of this story, the Samaritan was absolutely the worst folks. They were terrible. You didn't ever deal with them because they thought they were, they worshiped God in the wrong place. And I can't emphasize strongly enough what a big deal that was at the time. They worshiped God up north. They followed Moses' tradition, and they said they could worship on this Mount Gerizim where they did. But all the other believers of God's chosen people said, no, it's Jerusalem. That's the only place you can go. So these folks were right out. And it's the Samaritan who stops in Jesus' story. Therefore, the only thing we can assume in this is that Jesus says, your neighbor, to be a neighbor is to do what this man did, even though you despise these people. How will you be a neighbor? And that's a real challenge. You can tell, you'll see a student walking around our small town and with their brightly dyed hair and their piercings and things, and you'll see folks not sure what to do with that. Or maybe you'll have students who are international, or you'll have professors who are international, or you'll just have professors who can be socially awkward, or you'll have people who are staff on campus but not in town. And there's this divide there. And there's lots of divides in our world. I just thought I'd talk about this one today because I have personal experience of it. And growing up here, I thought it was no different to go to, the London Ballet, or to go to a show put on by folks out of Russia or Thailand who'd come visit, than I thought it was any different to go and play Little League over at Wells Park or some other little spot in our small town. Like, these things were normal to me, but they were not normal to my peers. And I learned very quickly that what I thought of as neighbor was not what other people thought of as neighbor. And I had to be cautious about how I talked about who was human and who wasn't, right? And that's what Jesus is talking about too. He's not saying you have to agree. He doesn't say to the fella, you have to agree with the Samaritans. He He doesn't say that you should agree with every other religious people. He doesn't say that you should think that you should put up with all the things that other people say and do. No, that's not what he's saying. And I think sometimes even in our small community, whether it be the campus or farm and country folk, whether it be folks who work in construction or folks who work at the hospital, I mean, there's a lot that divides us. But the idea that you have to agree with everything else that somebody believes or says or is a part of their identity, this is not what's being talked about in being a neighbor. What's talking about is saying that person is human. You should acknowledge them and care for them as human. That's what it is to be a neighbor, is to see someone in need and to help. Jesus says, be a good neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the fellow says, well, how do I do that? Who's my neighbor? And Jesus says, which fellow was a neighbor? Was it the priest? Was it the good, faithful person? Was it the merchant? No, it was the Samaritan, the people you disagree with the most. That person was a neighbor. If they can do it, you can do it. And I would also push that. That's the point Jesus makes here. It's not, you have to love everyone perfectly. It's rather, no, you need to act in love towards everyone. Be a neighbor to them. That's different. That doesn't mean you have to agree. It means you have to treat them with care. I'm Pastor Chris from Renowned Devotions, from Trinity Lutheran in Cyrus, challenging you this week. How will you be a neighbor? I'll see you next time.